My dear friends, tonight we embark on a deeper journey together, immersing ourselves in the heart of a sacred story from God's Word, a narrative that whispers of divine providence, human ingenuity, and the quiet unfolding of God's intricate plans, even in the most pastoral of settings. We travel back, far back, to the dusty plains of Haran, to a time of patriarchs and promises, where the air is thick with the scent of livestock and the silent prayers of a man yearning for home. You find yourself drawn into the world of Jacob, a figure of complexity and faith, as he navigates the final, crucial years of his long sojourn in a foreign land, his heart tethered to a promise given long ago. The sun beats down, the landscape stretches wide, and under the vast, ancient sky, a peculiar drama of flocks and family, of cunning and covenant, is about to unfold, revealing ancient husbandry secrets that, perhaps, hold whispers for our own journeys toward rest and trust. Imagine, for a prolonged moment, walking those ancient paths alongside these figures of faith, feeling the dust beneath your feet, the sun on your skin, and witnessing these pivotal events unfold, events that have shaped generations and continue to echo with profound spiritual truths about God's unwavering faithfulness and his ability to work through the most unexpected means. The world of Jacob's sheep farm is not just a historical account, it is a testament to perseverance, a study in divine timing, and an invitation to observe how God's blessings can manifest in tangible, surprising ways. So, before we delve deeper into this expansive narrative, if these stories from Scripture resonate with your spirit and bring you comfort, I warmly invite you to like this reflection and subscribe to our channel. It truly helps share these messages of hope, faith, and peace with others. And as we settle into this sacred space together, please feel comfortable sharing, if you wish, a brief prayer intention in your heart or in the comments. Perhaps a favorite Bible verse that speaks to you of God's provision or guidance, or simply the place from which you are listening tonight, joining our quiet community on this extended journey of faith. Now, let the cares of the day gently fade away. Find your quiet space, perhaps say a silent prayer, breathe deeply, and let us open our hearts and minds to the wisdom, comfort, and unfolding wonder of God's Word in this ancient narrative. You are there, in Haran, a land that has become both a refuge and a place of prolonged service for Jacob. The air is often dry, carrying the scent of dust, the distant bleating of sheep and goats, and the subtle fragrance of desert herbs crushed underfoot. For 14 long years, you have seen Jacob toil for his uncle, Laban 7 years for Leah, though his heart longed for Rachel, and then 7 more for Rachel, the love of his life. These years have been etched onto his face, in the lines around his eyes that have scanned countless horizons, in the strength of his hands, weathered by labor and the elements. You feel the weight of those years, the patient endurance, the unspoken frustrations, the deferred dreams of returning to Canaan, the land promised to his fathers, Abraham and Isaac. Now, with his family growing, with sons and daughters filling his tents, the desire to establish his own household, to return to his own people and his own God in the land of promise, burns ever stronger within him. You sense a shift in the atmosphere around Laban's sprawling homestead. The initial welcome, perhaps, has thinned over to decades. Jacob has been a source of immense blessing for Laban, a fact Laban himself has acknowledged. For the Lord blessed Laban on Jacob's account. You can almost hear Laban, in a moment of candor, admitting, "I have learned by experience that the Lord has blessed me for your sake." Yet, blessings received can sometimes curdle into dependence, and dependence can breed a subtle resentment or a desire to maintain control. Jacob, you perceive, is no longer just a nephew, a hired hand. He is a man of substance in his own right, though his wealth is still largely tied to Laban's enterprise. The time has come. You feel Jacob's resolve solidifying. He approaches Laban, his voice calm but firm, carrying the weight of his years of service and his deep longing for home. "Send me away," Jacob requests, "that I may go to my own home and to my country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, and let me go. For you know the service that I have rendered to you." Imagine the scene, Laban, a man accustomed to having his way, a shrewd negotiator, perhaps stroking his beard, his eyes calculating. He knows Jacob's value. Losing Jacob means losing the conduit of blessing, the skilled shepherd who has multiplied his flocks. You see Laban's mind working, searching for a way to retain Jacob, to prolong this profitable arrangement. "Please stay," Laban might implore, his tone perhaps softer now, more persuasive. "If I have found favor in your sight, for I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you." He continues, "Name your wages, and I will give it." This is a pivotal moment. Jacob, wary of Laban's crafty nature, the memory of being tricked with Leah still a sensitive point, needs an agreement that is clear, less open to manipulation. You listen as Jacob recounts his faithful service, how Laban's little flock has grown into a multitude under his care. He doesn't ask for a portion of the existing flock accumulated over the past 20 years, which might seem just. Instead, he proposes something quite specific, something that on the surface seems modest, almost disadvantageous to himself. "You shall not give me anything," Jacob declares, a statement that likely catches Laban off guard. "If you will do this one thing for me, I will again pasture your flock and keep it. Let me pass through all your flock today, removing from it every speckled and spotted sheep and every black lamb, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and such shall be my wages." You can almost see Laban's eyes light up internally. Speckled, spotted, and black sheep are not the norm. The vast majority of sheep in these regions are white, and goats are typically dark brown or black. Jacob is asking for the exceptions, the anomalies. To Laban, this must sound like an excellent deal. He will get to keep the vast majority of his flock, the solid-colored, prime animals, while Jacob builds his own flock from the relative few that are unusually marked. It seems like a clever way to keep Jacob working for him for several more years, while minimizing the cost. "Good," Laban exclaims. "Let it be as you have said." You sense the swiftness of his agreement, perhaps a little too eager, a little too pleased. Theologians and commentators through the ages have marveled at the layers of meaning in this divine promise and Jacob's peculiar proposal. Was Jacob simply being shrewd, relying on some unknown principle of animal husbandry? Or was there a deeper reliance on God's guidance, a faith that God would provide for him even through such an unconventional arrangement? Perhaps it is a blend of both, human effort and divine blessing intertwined, a pattern so often seen in the narratives of faith. But Laban, true to his nature, immediately takes steps to ensure Jacob's starting point is as minimal as possible. That very day, you watch as Laban, not Jacob, goes through the flocks. He removes all the male goats that were ring-straked and spotted, and all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had white on it, and all the black lambs, and he gives them into the charge of his own sons. He doesn't just set them aside. He puts a 3 days journey between himself and Jacob. Think about that distance, a deliberate act to ensure there is no accidental intermingling, no way for Jacob to easily benefit from these separated, specially marked animals. Jacob is left to tend the rest of Laban's flock, the solid-colored animals, from which his future wages, the speckled, spotted, and dark offspring, are supposed to come. You stand with Jacob, surveying the flocks now under his care. They are overwhelmingly white sheep and solid-colored goats. The animals that were to be his starting capital, his initial share, have been whisked away. It's a stark situation. How can he produce speckled and spotted offspring from animals that show no such traits? From a purely human perspective, the task seems designed for failure. Laban has, once again, tried to outmaneuver Jacob. You feel a stirring of empathy for Jacob, a sense of the injustice, the cunning manipulation he continually faces. This is a moment that could breed despair, anger, or resignation. Yet, you also sense within Jacob a quiet resilience, perhaps a deep-seated trust that has been forged through years of wrestling with his brother, with his father-in-law, and ultimately, with God. He has learned that God's ways are not Laban's ways. He has the promise of God from Bethel, years ago, that God would be with him, keep him, and bring him back to his land. That promise must feel like a distant star sometimes, but it is still there, a guiding light in the vast darkness of uncertainty. Consider, for a moment, the profound human experience of being placed in a situation that seems impossible, where the odds are stacked against you, where those in power have seemingly fixed the game. It is in such moments that faith is truly tested, not in the abstract, but in the very real, gritty circumstances of life. Where does one turn when human strategies seem insufficient? Jacob is at such a juncture. The dust of Haran settles around you. The bleating of the homogeneous flock a constant reminder of the challenge ahead. You observe Jacob. He doesn't immediately protest Laban's actions. He doesn't despair. Instead, a plan begins to form, a strategy so unusual, so rooted in ancient, perhaps even obscure, pastoral lore that it has puzzled and intrigued readers of Scripture for millennia. It is a plan that seems to blend keen observation, folk wisdom, and perhaps a spark of divinely inspired ingenuity. This is where the ancient husbandry secrets begin to emerge, not as magic, but as a dedicated, focused effort. The cultural context here is significant. Shepherds in the ancient Near East were incredibly observant. Their livelihood depended on understanding their animals, their health, their habits, their breeding cycles. They lived among their flocks, day and night. They knew the subtle signs, the rhythms of nature, in a way that we, in our modern, technologically driven world, can scarcely imagine. While the science of genetics was unknown, experienced stockmen knew that like sometimes begets like, but also that variations could occur. They might have observed that certain conditions or stimuli could, anecdotally, influence outcomes, even if the mechanism was not understood. Understanding this deep connection between the shepherd and the flock helps us grasp that Jacob wasn't just idly hoping, he was preparing to act. You feel the quiet determination in Jacob. He is not passive. He is about to engage in a very active, very deliberate process. The sun begins to dip lower, casting long shadows across the plains. The flocks are gathered, settled for the night. You see Jacob, perhaps sitting by a small fire, his mind at work, not just on the immediate problem, but on the larger promise that fuels his endurance. The stars emerge, brilliant in the clear desert sky, the same stars that shone down on his grandfather Abraham when God promised him descendants, as numerous as those stars. That covenant promise is Jacob's inheritance, and it is for the sake of that promise, and the future nation it represents, that he must find a way forward. The air grows cooler, the sounds of the camp quiet down. There's a stillness, a sense of anticipation. Jacob is on the threshold of a new phase of his work for Laban, a phase where his wages will depend not on Laban's generosity, which has proven unreliable, but on a direct interaction with the very processes of life and generation within the flocks, processes he believes God can influence. How God's grace operates in such moments is a sacred mystery that continues to inspire awe and humble reflection. It challenges us to consider how often God works through what might seem like ordinary, even perplexing, means to achieve his extraordinary purposes. You might ponder, as you stand on the edge of this unfolding drama, the nature of waiting and working. Jacob has waited many years. Now he must work in a new way, with a new kind of focus. His peculiar sheep farm is about to become a reality, not by Laban's design, but by a combination of Jacob's persistent effort and, as the story will reveal, God's unseen blessing. The narrative doesn't shy away from the complexities of human dealings, the trickery, the striving. Yet, through it all, a golden thread of divine faithfulness is visible. If one looks closely, think about the environment. The watering troughs, these are crucial locations. All animals must come to drink. It is a place of gathering, a focal point in the daily rhythm of the flocks. It is here, at these vital spots, that Jacob will implement his strategy. The plan is forming. Piece by piece, in his mind, you sense the meticulous thought, the careful consideration of details. This isn't a rash impulse, but a considered approach. The spiritual atmosphere is one of quiet trust mingled with human striving. Jacob is not portrayed as a perfect saint. He is a patriarch, yes, but also a man who has known deceit and has practiced it himself in his youth. His journey is one of sanctification, of being shaped and molded by God through difficult experiences. This current challenge with Laban is another crucible, refining his character, deepening his dependence on God, even as he employs his own God-given intelligence and resourcefulness. The weight of the covenant rests on Jacob, though he may only partially grasp its full implications. He is carrying the future of God's chosen people. His prosperity is not just for himself, but for the lineage through which the Messiah will one day come. This adds another layer of significance to his efforts to build a flock. It's a personal struggle for fairness and provision, but it's also part of a much larger, divine drama. As you observe Jacob in these initial moments after Laban's deceptive act of separating the flocks, you are reminded that God's promises are often worked out in the midst of very human, very messy situations. Faith doesn't remove us from the complexities of life. It empowers us to navigate them with hope and resilience, trusting that God is at work, even when his methods are surprising and his pathway unclear. The story of Jacob's sheep farm is more than just an ancient anecdote about animal breeding. It's a profound illustration of how God meets us in our struggles, honors persistent faith, and can bring abundance out of apparent scarcity. The initial setup is bleak. Jacob has the wrong kind of animals to produce the right kind of offspring for his wages. Laban thinks he has secured Jacob's labor for cheap, but Laban, for all his cunning, has not reckoned with Jacob's tenacity, nor with the quiet, powerful working of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The stage is set not for Jacob's defeat, but for a surprising demonstration of divine favor. You feel the quiet anticipation in the air, the sense that something remarkable is about to happen. Born from a place of seeming disadvantage, the narrative whispers that with God, the definitions of advantage and disadvantage can be wonderfully overturned. The very elements that seem to be against Jacob may become the instruments of his blessing. You see Jacob moving among the solid-colored sheep and goats, his gaze thoughtful, observant. He is not merely a tender of flocks, he is a student of them. He is studying their ways, their strengths, their cycles. His mind, sharpened by years of survival and negotiation, is now fully engaged in this unique challenge. The vast, open land of Haran, which has been his workplace for 2 decades, now becomes the canvas for an experiment in faith and diligence. The silence of these initial days, after Laban's sons have departed with the marked animals, is not empty. It is filled with Jacob's planning and God's unseen presence, preparing the way for an unexpected harvest. This careful observation, this deep understanding of the creatures in his care, will be foundational to the secrets he is about to employ. It's a reminder that God often blesses the work of our hands when that work is diligent, thoughtful, and attuned to the created order he has established. The scene is quiet, deceptively so. Beneath the surface of routine pastoral life, a current of divine purpose is beginning to flow, a current that will soon become visible in the most surprising of ways, changing Jacob's fortunes and demonstrating God's power to provide. The stillness before the action holds its own kind of power, a prelude to the unfolding of a plan that will leave Laban astonished and Jacob abundantly blessed, a testament to a God who sees, who knows, and who acts on behalf of those who trust in him, even when the path forward seems obscure and the resources at hand appear utterly insufficient. The dust motes dance in the Mesopotamian sunlight, and the ancient drama of faith and toil continues, with you as a silent, attentive witness to the unfolding of God's quiet miracles. The days turn into weeks, and you are with Jacob as he patiently tends Laban's remaining flocks, the solid-colored sheep, the unblemished goats. Laban is distant, a 3 days' journey away with his sons and the separated, marked animals, confident, no doubt, that Jacob's wages will be meager for a long time to come. But Jacob is not idle in his waiting, nor is he simply going through the motions of a shepherd. His mind is active, his eyes keen. You observe him closely, this man of resilience. He walks among the animals, his staff in hand, his presence a familiar comfort to them. He leads them to pasture, to water, his movements economical, born of long experience. But there is a new intensity in his gaze, a focused study. He is watching the animals, especially during their breeding seasons, noting their strength, their vigor, the subtle signs of their readiness to mate. This profound, intimate knowledge of the flock is the first secret of his ancient husbandry. Then you see him act. Jacob goes to the trees that grow near the watering places, the poplar, the almond, and the plane tree. These are common trees in that landscape, their leaves offering shade, their branches pliable. He takes fresh-cut branches, not dried or dead wood, but living wood, full of sap. And then he does something peculiar. With careful strokes of his knife, he peels white streaks in them, exposing the white inner wood, creating a striped or streaked pattern on the branches themselves. Imagine the visual, the dark bark contrasting with the startling white of the exposed wood. Patterns of light and dark, much like the speckled and spotted markings he desires in the offspring of the flock. There's a tactile reality to this. You can almost feel the slight resistance of the bark. As it's peeled away, the coolness of the fresh wood beneath. Smell the faint, sappy scent of the green branches. He doesn't just prepare a few of these. He makes many. And then he sets these peeled branches in the watering troughs or gutters, directly in front of the flocks when they come to drink, specifically when they are in heat and come to mate. The Bible tells us he set the rods which he had peeled in front of the flocks in the runnels. That is, the watering troughs where the flocks came to drink. And since they bred when they came to drink, the flocks bred in front of the rods. You are there, watching this unusual scene. The thirsty animals, driven by their natural instincts, approach the water. And there, right before their eyes, at the very place where they satisfy their thirst and engage in the act of procreation, are these starkly patterned branches. What is the meaning of this? The text doesn't fully explain the mechanism, and it has been a subject of much discussion. Some have suggested it's a form of sympathetic magic, a folk belief that visual stimuli at the time of conception could influence the offspring. Others wonder if Jacob had observed some subtle biological principle, perhaps related to stress or environmental cues that we don't fully understand. Still others, and perhaps most compellingly, see this as an act of faith and obedience, a method that God chose to bless, regardless of its scientific efficacy. It is one of those beautiful mysteries in Scripture where human action and divine agency seem to coalesce. Theologians through the ages have marveled at the layers of meaning in this divine promise, and indeed, in the methods God sometimes chooses to fulfill them. How God's grace operates in such moments is a sacred mystery that continues to inspire awe and humble reflection. Jacob is doing something tangible, something that requires effort and consistency. He is not passively waiting for a miracle. He is actively participating in the process, using the knowledge and resources available to him, however unconventional they might seem. You witness the daily repetition of this. Each day, Jacob ensures the peeled rods are in place. He watches. He waits. This requires patience. There are no instant results in animal husbandry. It is a slow process, tied to the natural cycles of life. You feel the rhythm of this life, the early mornings, leading the flocks out, the heat of the midday sun, finding shade, the gathering at the watering troughs, the crucial point of Jacob's intervention, the evenings, bringing the flocks to a place of rest. Through it all, there is this quiet, persistent activity with the branches. You can imagine some of Laban's other servants, or perhaps even passers-by, looking at Jacob's methods with curiosity, perhaps even skepticism or quiet amusement. What is this strange ritual with the sticks? Then, the first signs begin to appear among the new lambs and kids being born. You start to see them. Some are speckled, some are spotted, some have streaks. Not all of them, of course, but enough. Enough to be noticeable. Enough to be different from what one would normally expect from a flock of solid-colored parents. You can imagine Jacob's quiet satisfaction, the vindication of his efforts, the confirmation that his trust was not misplaced. Each marked animal is a small miracle, a tangible piece of evidence that God is honoring his unusual agreement with Laban and his even more unusual methods. You might reflect here on the nature of faith and works. Jacob's faith in God's promise to be with him and bless him is coupled with diligent, if peculiar, work. It's a reminder that God often calls us to step out and act, even when the path isn't entirely clear or the methods seem unconventional. Faith without works is dead, as the Apostle James would later write. Jacob's work with the peeled rods is his act of faith made visible. Consider the sensory details of this emerging success. The sight of a newborn lamb, its fleece still damp, bearing the distinct spots that mark it as belonging to Jacob. The sound of its first bleats, the feel of its soft wool. For Jacob, these are not just animals. They are his wages, his future, the means by which he will finally be able to return to his homeland as a man of substance. able to provide for his large family. Each one is a testament to God's provision. Laban is not present to witness these initial successes. He is 3 days' journey away. But word would eventually travel. Shepherds talk. News from one camp would reach another. How would Laban react when he first heard? Perhaps with disbelief. Then, as the reports continued, perhaps with a growing unease, a dawning realization that Jacob, whom he had tried to outsmart, was somehow prospering. You can almost picture Laban, his brow furrowed, trying to understand how this could be happening. He had removed all the visibly marked animals. He had set the terms. Yet, Jacob's flock of peculiar sheep and goats was beginning to grow. The narrative highlights a further refinement of Jacob's technique. Moreover, whenever the stronger of the flock were breeding, Jacob would lay the rods in the runnels before the eyes of the flock, that they might breed among the rods, but for the feebler of the flock he would not lay them there. So the feebler would be Laban's, and the stronger Jacob's. This is a remarkable detail. Jacob is not just indiscriminately applying his method. He is exercising skilled judgment, a shepherd's wisdom. He observes the animals, discerning which are the strongest, the most vigorous, the healthiest. These are the ones he wants to breed for his own flock. He ensures that these prime animals mate in the presence of the peeled rods. For the weaker, less desirable animals, he omits the rods. This selective breeding, however rudimentary by modern scientific standards, demonstrates Jacob's keen observation and his commitment to building a quality flock. He is not just aiming for numbers, he is aiming for strength and vitality. You see his dedication, his attention to detail. This isn't a haphazard affair. It's a calculated, sustained effort. You might ponder the wisdom in focusing one's best efforts on the strongest opportunities, a principle that often holds true in many areas of life. Jacob is investing his unique technique where it will yield the best return, ensuring his own flock will be robust and healthy. Imagine the scene at the watering troughs now. There's a differentiation happening. The stronger ewes and nannies, in their season, are drawn to the water, and there are the rods. The weaker ones, perhaps, are less assertive, or Jacob subtly guides them away from the treated areas, or simply doesn't place the rods when they are the predominant ones mating. This requires constant vigilance, an astute understanding of animal behavior and hierarchy within the flock. It's a testament to Jacob's skill as a master shepherd, a skill honed over to decades. You feel the spiritual undertones of this. Jacob is partnering with God's creative processes. While the Bible attributes the outcome to God's blessing, Jacob's active, intelligent participation is undeniable. It's a beautiful synergy. Perhaps God inspired this specific method in Jacob's heart, or perhaps God chose to bless the method Jacob devised through his own ingenuity and observation, imbuing it with an efficacy it might not otherwise have possessed. While interpretations may vary on minor details, the core message of God's unwavering love shines through, and in this case, his provision for his servant Jacob. The days are long, the work is repetitive, but there is a growing sense of hope and purpose. You see Jacob moving with a lighter step, perhaps. The burden of his uncertain future is slowly lifting as he sees the tangible results of his labor. And God's favor, the flocks are growing. The speckled, spotted, and dark-colored animals are increasing in number. They stand out against the backdrop of Laban's solid-colored flock, a visual testament to Jacob's emerging prosperity. Consider the patience and perseverance required. This wasn't an overnight success. It unfolded season by season, birth by birth. Each successful birth was a small victory, a quiet affirmation. It's a powerful lesson in the virtue of persistence, of staying committed to a course of action, especially when guided by faith. Many people might have given up, discouraged by Laban's initial trickery or by the unconventional nature of the strategy. But Jacob persevered. You might reflect on how God often works through means that the world might consider foolish or inexplicable. The peeling of branches and placing them in water troughs, it sounds like folklore, perhaps even superstition to a modern, scientifically minded person. Yet, in the economy of God, it became the very instrument of Jacob's blessing. This challenges our own preconceived notions of how God operates. He is not limited by our understanding or our expectations. He can use the simple, the unexpected, the seemingly insignificant to achieve his grand designs. For the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than human strength. The Apostle Paul would later write to the Corinthians, a sentiment that resonates deeply with this part of Jacob's story. The atmosphere around Jacob's portion of the encampment begins to change. There's a subtle hum of growing abundance. The bleating of his unique flock becomes more numerous. The visual landscape of the herds is slowly but surely transforming. You can imagine the conversations among the shepherds, the whispers, the sense of wonder, perhaps even a little awe at what is happening. Jacob, the man who started with nothing but Laban's solid-colored animals, is now accumulating a distinct and thriving flock of his own. This period is one of intense focus for Jacob. His energy is channeled into this singular task, building his flock according to the agreement. His relationship with Laban is still distant, defined by that 3-day journey, but the terms of their contract are being fulfilled in a way Laban could never have anticipated. The ancient husbandry secret is proving to be remarkably effective, not perhaps as a standalone scientific technique, but as a practice blessed by the Almighty. You stand as a witness to this quiet miracle, unfolding in the everyday rhythms of pastoral life. There are no dramatic displays of divine power, no fire from heaven, no parting of seas. Instead, there's the steady, almost imperceptible work of God through the faithful, diligent efforts of His servant, using elements of the created order: trees, water, animals in a unique combination. It's a reminder that God's miracles are not always spectacular. Sometimes they are woven into the very fabric of our daily lives, in the processes of growth and provision, in the quiet answer to prayer, in the reward of patient labor. The Haran carries the scent of thyme and the earthy aroma of the flocks. The sun climbs high, then begins its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. And amidst this timeless beauty, Jacob continues his peculiar work, his heart increasingly assured that the God of his fathers is with him, prospering the work of his hands, turning a cunning scheme of Laban's into an avenue of abundant blessing for himself. The peeled rods in the watering troughs become symbols not of magic, but of a focused faith, an ingenious diligence, and a God who delights in providing for his people in ways that can surprise and confound the wise of this world. The mystery of how it all worked remains, a gentle invitation to trust in a God whose ways are higher than our ways, and whose wisdom can bring forth life and abundance from the most unpromising of beginnings. You feel a sense of peace watching this unfold, a reassurance that God's hand is truly upon Jacob, guiding him, providing for him, and preparing him for the next stage of his journey back to the land of promise. The quiet increase of the speckled and spotted flock is a song of hope, a melody of divine faithfulness played out on the vast plains of Mesopotamia. The seasons continue their ancient cycle across the plains of Haran. You remain with Jacob, a silent observer, as his unique enterprise flourishes. The method of the peeled rods, coupled with his astute selection of the stronger animals for his own breeding program, yields results that are nothing short of astonishing. What began as a trickle of speckled, spotted, and dark-colored offspring swells into a significant stream, and then a veritable river of uniquely patterned livestock. You see Jacob's flocks expanding day by day, week by week. The landscape around his encampment is increasingly dotted with these distinctively marked sheep and goats, a clear and visible testament to his prospering fortunes. And the man became exceedingly prosperous, the sacred text tells us, and had large flocks, female servants and male servants, and camels and donkeys. Imagine the sheer visual impact of this. Where once there were only Laban's solid-colored animals under Jacob's care, now there are vast herds that are distinctly Jacob's. The white sheep are now interspersed with, and perhaps increasingly outnumbered by, those with patches, spots, and streaks. The dark goats have their counterparts in those with splashes of white or lighter shades. It's a living, breathing, bleeding tapestry of God's unlikely provision. You can almost hear the increased sounds of the camp, the more numerous bleating of lambs and kids, the chatter of the male and female servants Jacob is now able to acquire, the soft grunts of camels, the braying of donkeys. These are all signs of considerable wealth in that ancient pastoral economy. You walk with Jacob through his burgeoning herds. There's a quiet confidence about him now, a man who has seen God's hand directly and miraculously provide. He moves with the assurance of one who has partnered with the divine and seen the fruits of that collaboration. His gaze is still watchful, his care for the animals undiminished, but there is also the look of a successful entrepreneur, a patriarch establishing his own significant household. The dust raised by his growing flocks is the dust of prosperity. The water drawn for them is the water of abundance. You might reflect on the nature of blessing. Jacob's blessing is tangible, material. It's not just a spiritual feeling. It's sheep, goats, servants, camels, donkeys. In the Old Testament economy, such material blessings were often seen as direct evidence of God's favor. This doesn't mean that hardship or poverty indicates God's displeasure, a misunderstanding that even Job's friends fell into. However, in Jacob's specific covenant context, as an heir of the Abrahamic promise, this visible prosperity served as a confirmation of God's faithfulness to his word. God had promised to be with Jacob and to bless him, and here was the undeniable evidence. Consider the daily life on this now thriving peculiar sheep farm. The logistics of managing such large flocks would be considerable. More shepherds would be needed, more grazing land sought, more water sources managed. Jacob is no longer just a shepherd. He is the head of a significant and growing enterprise. You see him delegating tasks, overseeing operations, his managerial skills coming to the fore alongside his pastoral ones. His sons are growing older too, perhaps beginning to take on responsibilities within the family business. Leah and Rachel, his wives, would also be managing larger households with more servants to oversee. The entire dynamic of Jacob's family unit is shifting due to this newfound wealth. But with growing prosperity often come new challenges, especially in the context of human relationships. You begin to sense a change in the atmosphere when Laban or his sons are near, or when news of Jacob's success reaches them. The initial surprise, perhaps even grudging admiration, begins to sour into something else. You hear the whispers, the discontented murmurs from Laban's sons. Jacob has taken all that was our father's, and from what was our father's he has gained all this wealth. Envy is a corrosive emotion, and you see it beginning to eat away at the relationship between Jacob and his kinsmen. Laban's sons feel cheated, perhaps, believing that Jacob's gain is their father's loss, conveniently forgetting the initial agreement and the fact that Jacob started with nothing but solid-colored animals that were still, technically, Laban's. They don't see God's hand. They only see Jacob's rapidly accumulating assets. And Laban himself? Jacob saw that Laban's face was not toward him as it had been before. The subtle cues of relationship, the averted gaze, the cooler tone of voice, the lack of warmth that was perhaps there in earlier, less prosperous times for Jacob. You can feel the unspoken tension, the resentment simmering beneath the surface. Laban, who had once acknowledged that God blessed him because of Jacob, now seems to view Jacob as a rival, a threat to his own wealth and status. The success that Jacob rightly earned through hard work, ingenuity, and divine blessing becomes a source of friction and alienation. This is a profound human experience, is it not? Sometimes, the very blessings we receive can stir up jealousy or animosity in others, even those close to us. How do we navigate such situations? Jacob is becoming increasingly aware of this shift. He is astute. He reads the signs. He knows that his position in Haran, once secure through his usefulness to Laban, is becoming precarious due to his very success. The land of Haran, which had been a place of refuge and work for over 20 years, is beginning to feel less like home and more like hostile territory. You might ponder the irony here. Laban had tried multiple times to exploit Jacob, to keep him bound and in his debt. Now, Jacob's God-given prosperity is creating a situation where Jacob himself feels compelled to leave, not out of poverty, but out of a need for safety and peace from the growing envy of his in-laws. It is a complex dynamic, rich with the truths of human nature. The sacred text doesn't shy away from portraying these flawed human interactions, the jealousies and suspicions that can mar even family relationships. What does Jacob do in the face of this cooling relationship, this rising tide of resentment? He continues his work, but you sense a growing watchfulness, a prayerful consideration of his next steps. The desire to return to Canaan, his true homeland, the land of promise, must be intensifying with each passing day, with each uncomfortable encounter or overheard remark. His prosperity is a means to an end, not just wealth for its own sake, but the resources to make that long-desired journey home, to establish himself in the land God had promised to his forefathers. The sheer scale of Jacob's success is emphasized in the biblical account. It wasn't a minor increase. He became exceedingly prosperous. This speaks to the abundant nature of God's blessing. When God decides to bless, He often does so lavishly, beyond our expectations. Think of the overflowing nets of fish for the disciples, or the 5 loaves and a fish feeding thousands. Jacob's story fits this pattern of divine generosity. He asked for the speckled and spotted, a seemingly small portion, and God multiplied them exceedingly. You reflect on the ancient husbandry secrets. Were they truly secrets, or simply the application of keen observation and diligent effort? Blessed by God? Perhaps the secret was Jacob's unwavering focus, his refusal to be defeated by Laban's initial deception, and his willingness to try an unconventional approach. And ultimately, the greatest secret was the favor of God. Unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. Jacob labored, and he watched, but it was the Lord who gave the increase, validating his efforts in a spectacular way. The camels and donkeys are particularly significant. These were beasts of burden, essential for travel and for transporting goods. Acquiring them meant Jacob was becoming mobile, capable of undertaking a major migration with his large family and extensive possessions. His wealth was not just static in the form of flocks. It was becoming a resource that could facilitate his departure and his re-establishment in a new land. Every camel acquired, every donkey added to his train, was another step closer to the possibility of returning to Canaan. As you observe the vastness of Jacob's holdings, you are reminded of God's promise to Abraham, "I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." Jacob, as Abraham's grandson, is a key inheritor of this covenant. His personal prosperity is interwoven with this larger divine plan. The wealth he accumulates is not merely for his own comfort, but as part of the establishment of the lineage through whom God's promises to the world would eventually be fulfilled. This adds a theological depth to the story of the sheep farm. It's not just about one man getting rich, but about God faithfully building the foundations of his covenant people. You may consider the responsibility that comes with such abundance. While the narrative focuses on the accumulation, one can imagine the increased duties of stewardship, of caring for not just animals, but also a growing number of human dependents. Wealth brings its own burdens, its own tests of character. Would Jacob manage this prosperity with wisdom and righteousness? His past dealings, such as the acquisition of Esau's birthright and Isaac's blessing, were marked by cunning. Is he growing in integrity as he grows in wealth? The scriptures suggest a maturing process in Jacob, a slow shaping by God's hand through trials and blessings alike. The contrast between Jacob's thriving enterprise and Laban's souring attitude becomes more pronounced. It's a poignant illustration of how differently two people can view the same set of circumstances. Jacob sees God's faithfulness and the reward of his toil. Laban and his sons see only a loss of their own perceived advantage, a shift in power they resent. While interpretations may vary on minor details, the core message of God's unwavering love shines through for his chosen ones. Even as human sin and frailty continue to complicate the narrative, the story doesn't paint a simplistic picture of blessing without challenges. Rather, it shows that blessings can themselves lead to new forms of trial. The very success of the peculiar sheep farm is now pushing Jacob towards the next chapter of his life. Haran can no longer contain him, not just because of his wealth, but because the relational environment has become toxic. The divine purpose is subtly at work even in the negative reactions of Laban and his sons. Their envy is, in a way, helping to propel Jacob towards his destiny, loosening his ties to this foreign land where he has lived and labored for so long. You stand amidst the sights and sounds of Jacob's prosperity, the endless flocks, the busy servants, the valuable camels. It is a scene of almost overwhelming abundance, born from a humble, even desperate, beginning. The peeled poplar, almond, and plane branches, once symbols of an outlandish strategy, have become silent witnesses to a miracle of provision. They may still be used, or perhaps the flocks are now so predominantly marked that the intervention is less critical. The narrative moves on from the method to its undeniable results. The air is filled not just with the scent of sheep and dust, but with an almost palpable tension, a sense of impending change. Jacob knows, and you know with him, that this situation cannot last indefinitely. The prosperity is a blessing, but it is also a catalyst. God has provided him with the means to leave, and now, the actions of Laban and his sons are providing the impetus. The ancient husbandry secrets have served their purpose, transforming Jacob from a dependent laborer into a wealthy patriarch, ready, at least in material terms, for the journey that lies ahead. The focus now begins to shift from how Jacob acquired his wealth to what he will do with it, and how he will respond to the growing hostility around him. The quiet fields of Haran, once a place of patient toil, are becoming a stage for the prelude to a dramatic departure. The faithfulness of God has been demonstrated in abundance, and now, a new test of faith and courage looms on the horizon for Jacob. The simmering resentment from Laban and his sons hangs heavy in the air. Around Jacob's flourishing camp, you feel the palpable shift in their demeanor, the way their eyes follow Jacob. The subtle change from familial connection, however strained, to open displeasure. Jacob, ever perceptive, has noted this change in Laban's countenance. It is no longer toward him as it had been before. His extraordinary success, born of ingenuity and divine blessing, has paradoxically made his position in Haran increasingly untenable. He is a stranger in a land that is growing hostile, despite having given to decades of his life in service there. His heart, you sense, is turning ever more earnestly towards Canaan, the land of his fathers, the land of promise. It is in this atmosphere of rising tension and unspoken anxieties that the voice of God cuts through the silence of Jacob's personal deliberations. You are there, perhaps in the quiet of the evening, after the flocks are settled, or in the stillness of the early morning, when Jacob hears it a clear, unmistakable directive from the Lord. Return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you. Genesis 31:3. These words are not just a suggestion, they are a divine summons, an affirmation of Jacob's deepest longings, and a promise of divine companionship for the journey ahead. Imagine the impact of these words on Jacob. For years, he has yearned for this. Now, the command comes, imbued with the authority and reassurance of God himself. The phrase "I will be with you" echoes the promise given at Bethel so many years ago, a promise that has been his anchor through all the trials and labors in Haran. This divine injunction galvanizes Jacob, but he does not act impulsively. He is a family man, a patriarch of a growing household. He calls for Rachel and Leah, his wives, bringing them out to the field, among his flocks, away from the listening ears of Laban's household. You are present at this crucial family council. The setting itself is significant amidst the evidence of God's blessing. The sheep and goats that represent their wealth and their future. The air is clear, the sky vast above them, a fitting backdrop for a conversation that will change the course of their lives. Jacob lays out the situation plainly to his wives. His words are measured, but they carry the weight of his long experience with their father. I see that your father's face is not toward me as it was before, he begins, confirming what they too may have observed or sensed. He doesn't immediately reveal God's direct command, but first builds his case based on Laban's consistent unfairness and God's consistent faithfulness. He reminds them of his dedicated service. You know that I have served your father with all my strength. This is not a boast, but a statement of fact, a testament to his diligence and commitment over 2 decades. Then he addresses Laban's duplicity directly. Yet your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. 10 times. You can feel the accumulated frustration in that statement, the weariness of constantly being on guard against Laban's manipulations. The 10 times might be a literal number or a figurative expression for repeatedly and excessively. Either way, it paints a clear picture of Laban's untrustworthy character. Jacob wants his wives to understand the full extent of the injustice he has endured. It's a delicate moment. He is, after all, speaking about their own father. But then, Jacob immediately pivots to God's overriding providence. But God did not permit him to harm me. This is a powerful statement of faith. Despite Laban's schemes, despite the attempts to defraud him, Jacob acknowledges God's sovereign protection. He doesn't portray himself as a victim, but as one under divine care. This perspective is crucial. It reframes all the hardships, all the unfairness, within the context of God's ultimate control and benevolent purpose. He then explains the seemingly miraculous increase of his flocks, attributing it directly to God's intervention in the face of Laban's attempts to limit his wages. If he said, "The spotted shall be your wages," then all the flock bore spotted, and if he said, "The striped shall be your wages," then all the flock bore striped. Thus God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me. Jacob recounts how, no matter what Laban designated as the unlikely offspring that would constitute Jacob's pay, God ensured those very types of animals were born in abundance. This highlights a flexibility and responsiveness in God's blessing that continually outmaneuvered Laban's shifting goalposts. You might reflect on how God's wisdom can so thoroughly confound human cunning. Laban thought he was being clever, always trying to minimize Jacob's share. But God simply turned Laban's own terms to Jacob's advantage every single time. And then, Jacob shares something deeply personal and confirmatory: a dream, a revelation from the angel of God. This dream occurred during the breeding season, providing a divine insight into the success of his flocks. In the breeding season of the flock I lifted up my eyes and saw in a dream that the rams that leaped upon the flock were striped, spotted, and mottled. Genesis 31:10-11. In this dream, the angel of God not only showed him the source of his prosperity, the divinely favored breeding, but also identified himself. "I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and made a vow to me." This is a profoundly significant moment. The God of Bethel. You are transported back with Jacob in his memory to that lonely night at Luz, fleeing from Esau, when he lay his head on a stone and dreamed of a ladder reaching to heaven, with angels ascending and descending. It was there that God first revealed himself directly to Jacob, promising to be with him, to keep him, to bring him back to this land, and to make his descendants numerous. Jacob had responded by anointing the stone as a pillar, calling the place Bethel, house of God, and vowing that if God would be with him and bring him back in peace, then the Lord would be his God. Now, after more than 20 years, in a dream concerning the very flocks that represent his material blessing, the angel of God explicitly reminds him of that foundational encounter and that vow. It's as if God is saying, "Remember my promise, see how I have been faithful. Now is the time for the next step." This remembrance of Bethel powerfully links Jacob's current prosperity and the call to return home with God's initial covenant promises to him. It imbues the entire peculiar sheep farm saga with deeper spiritual significance. It wasn't just about animal husbandry. It was about covenant faithfulness. You feel the impact of this revelation on Rachel and Leah. Their father, Laban, had been their primary point of reference for so long. But Jacob is now presenting a compelling case, not just of Laban's unfairness, but of God's active, intervening presence in their lives, culminating in a direct command linked to God's most sacred promises to Jacob. How do Rachel and Leah respond? Their answer is united and unequivocal. They side with Jacob. "Is there any portion or inheritance left to us in our father's house?" they ask, a rhetorical question highlighting their own sense of disenfranchisement. Are we not regarded by him as foreigners? For he has sold us, and he has indeed devoured our money. Genesis 31:14-15. Their words are sharp, revealing their own long-held grievances against Laban. They feel that Laban has treated them like commodities, profiting from their marriages, sold us, and then consuming the wealth that should have, by custom, perhaps been set aside for them or their children, devoured our money, referring to the bride price or Jacob's labor which enriched Laban. They see Laban's greed not just towards Jacob, but towards themselves as well. Their loyalty shifts decisively. They recognize that their future, their security, and their well-being are now intrinsically linked with Jacob and with Jacob's God. Their conclusion is clear. All the wealth that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do. Genesis 31-16. This is a powerful affirmation of Jacob's decision and a courageous step of faith for them. They are willing to leave their homeland, their extended family however dysfunctional, and venture into the unknown with Jacob, trusting in the God who is so clearly guided and provided for him. You sense the relief and perhaps the gratitude in Jacob as he hears their supportive response. Family unity in such a momentous decision is a profound blessing. The decision is made. They will leave Haran. They will obey God's call. The prosperity gained from the peculiar sheep farm now becomes the provision for this journey. All those speckled, spotted, and dark-colored sheep and goats, the camels and donkeys, the servants, they are not just symbols of wealth, but the necessary resources for a large-scale migration. You reflect on the elements that led to this decision: God's direct call, Jacob's careful communication and testimony of God's faithfulness, and the willing agreement of his wives based on their own experiences and understanding. It's a model of discerning God's will that involves divine guidance, reasoned consideration of circumstances, and familial accord. Theologians through the ages have marveled at the layers of meaning in this divine promise and the processes by which God leads his people. The ancient husbandry secrets have served their ultimate purpose. They were the means by which God fulfilled his promise to prosper Jacob in Haran, thus equipping him for this critical return to the promised land. The focus shifts from the mechanics of sheep breeding to the dynamics of divine calling and human obedience. Jacob, the once supplanter, the crafty negotiator, is here portrayed as a man responding to God's initiative, a man who has learned to recognize God's voice and trust his guidance, even when it means uprooting his entire existence. The importance of remembering God's past faithfulness, like the recall of Bethel, cannot be overstated. It provides the foundation of trust for future obedience. Jacob's memory of Bethel, reinforced by the angel's words, assures him that the God who made the promise is the God who is now commanding the next step, and the God who will accompany him. This gives him the courage to face the uncertainties of the journey ahead, a journey that will include not only leaving Laban, but also the daunting prospect of eventually encountering his estranged brother, Esau. The conversation in the field concludes. A quiet determination settles over Jacob and his wives. The time for hushed planning and preparation has begun. The flocks continue to graze peacefully round them, unaware of the momentous journey they are about to undertake. But for Jacob, Rachel, and Leah, the path ahead is now clear, illuminated by a divine word and confirmed by shared conviction. The years in Haran, with all their toil, trickery, and eventual triumph, are drawing to a close. The next chapter of Jacob's covenant journey is about to begin, a journey back to the land where God's promises to his family were first given, a land that awaits its heir. You feel the mix of anticipation and apprehension, the bittersweet sense of an ending and a new beginning, as Jacob prepares to lead his household out of Mesopotamia and towards the destiny God has ordained for him. The legacy of the peculiar sheep farm is secure. It has provided the sinews of war for the spiritual and physical migration. The decision to leave Haran has been made, sealed by God's command and the unified consent of Jacob, Rachel, and Leah. Now you witness the careful, clandestine preparations for departure. Jacob knows Laban. He knows that if Laban were aware of his intentions, he would undoubtedly try to prevent him from leaving, or at least try to confiscate a portion of his hard-earned wealth. So, secrecy is paramount. Jacob waits for an opportune moment. It comes when Laban is away, preoccupied with a significant pastoral event, sheep shearing. This was a time-consuming task, often done at a distance from the main homestead, involving many hands, and Laban's attention would be fully engaged. Jacob fled with all that he had. He rose and crossed the Euphrates River and set his face toward the hill country of Gilead. Genesis 31-21. You are there, caught up in the quiet urgency of this departure. Imagine the scene. Under the cover of Laban's absence, Jacob's entire household is mobilized. Tents are struck, belongings packed, provisions gathered. The vast flocks of speckled, spotted, and dark sheep and goats, the camels and donkeys, The male and female servants, this enormous caravan begins its slow, deliberate movement southward and westward, away from Haran, away from Laban's reach. Jacob, his wives, and his children are at the heart of this exodus. There's a sense of both liberation and trepidation in the air. They are leaving behind 20 years of their lives, the only home Jacob's children have ever known. But they are moving towards a promise, towards a destiny ordained by God. In the midst of this hurried departure, a curious and troubling incident occurs, a detail that adds a layer of complexity to the narrative. Rachel had stolen her father's household gods, Trophim. Genesis 31-19. You might pause here, pondering this act. Why would Rachel, who had just affirmed her faith in Jacob's God and her desire to follow his leading, take these pagan idols? Scholars have offered various explanations. Perhaps she saw them as a kind of good luck charm, a lingering superstition from her upbringing. Perhaps she believed they held some claim to Laban's inheritance and took them to secure a portion for herself and Jacob. Or perhaps she intended to deprive Laban of their supposed spiritual power or use them as leverage. Whatever her motive, it is a discordant note in the symphony of their God-ordained departure, a reminder of the imperfect faith and mixed motivations that often characterize even God's chosen people. It's one of those lesser-emphasized details that add richness, complexity, and authenticity to the biblical account, showing human beings in their full, sometimes contradictory, humanity. They travel for several days, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and Laban. They cross the great Euphrates River, a significant geographical boundary, symbolizing their definitive break from Mesopotamia. They journey towards the hill country of Gilead, a rugged, elevated region east of the Jordan River. You feel the rhythm of the journey, the slow pace of the flocks, the setting up of temporary camps each night, the constant watchfulness. But Laban is not to be so easily eluded. On the third day after Jacob's departure, word reaches him that Jacob has fled. You can imagine Laban's fury. He feels betrayed, outwitted again, and perhaps he genuinely misses his daughters and grandchildren, though his primary concern seems to be his perceived loss of control and property. He gathers his kinsmen and sets off in hot pursuit. For 7 days, he chases Jacob, finally overtaking him in the mountainous region of Gilead. The confrontation that Jacob had hoped to avoid is now inevitable. You are there as Laban's party approaches Jacob's encampment. Tension crackles in the air. Laban is indignant, accusatory. What have you done, that you have tricked me and driven away my daughters like captives of war? He demands. He paints himself as the aggrieved father, his daughters stolen away. He also mentions his power to harm Jacob, but claims that the God of your father spoke to him the previous night, warning him, "Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad." This divine intervention is crucial. God himself has put a restraint on Laban's anger, protecting Jacob even as he faces his enraged father-in-law. This is a clear instance of God fulfilling his promise to be with Jacob. How God's grace operates in such moments is a sacred mystery that continues to inspire awe and humble reflection, especially when divine protection manifests through a warning, given even to one's adversary. Laban then brings up his chief complaint, the one that seems to vex him most, beyond the departure itself. "And now you have gone away, because you longed greatly for your father's house. But why did you steal my gods?" Genesis 31-30. The missing Trophim are a major point of contention. Jacob, unaware of Rachel's actions, is genuinely perplexed and offended by this accusation. He knows he is innocent of this particular charge. His response is one of righteous indignation. First, he defends his secret departure, explaining his fear. "Because I was afraid. For I thought that you would take your daughters from me by force." This was a legitimate fear, given Laban's past behavior. Then, concerning the stolen gods, Jacob, confident in his household's innocence on this matter, makes a rash and dangerous pronouncement. "Anyone with whom you find your gods shall not live. In the presence of our kinsmen point out what I have that is yours, and take it." Genesis 31-32. He is so sure, yet he unknowingly places Rachel in grave danger with his words. Laban immediately begins a thorough search. He goes through Jacob's tent, then Leah's tent, Then the tents of the two female servants, but he finds nothing. Then he enters Rachel's tent. You watch as Rachel, resourceful and cunning like her father, employs a clever deception. She has taken the household gods and put them in the camel's saddle, and is sitting on them. When Laban enters, she says to her father, "Let not my lord be angry that I cannot rise before you, for the way of women is upon me." Genesis 31-35. She feigns menstruation, a condition that, by custom, would make her ritually unclean and the things she sat on untouchable, thus deterring Laban from a more thorough search of her seat. Laban searches but does not find the teraphim. Rachel's ruse succeeds. Once the search is over and the idols are not found, Jacob's pent-up frustration and anger at Laban, accumulated over 20 years of mistreatment, finally erupts. He unleashes a torrent of grievances. "What is my offense? What is my sin, that you have hotly pursued me? For you have felt through all my goods. What have you found of all your household goods? Set it here before my kinsmen and your kinsmen, that they may decide between us two." Genesis 31-36-37. He reminds Laban of his 20 years of faithful service, how he bore the loss of animals killed by beasts, how he endured scorching heat by day and frost by night, how Laban changed his wages 10 times. "If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac, had not been on my side," Jacob declares, "surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God saw my affliction and the labor of my hands, and rebuked you last night." Genesis 31-42. It is a powerful, cathartic speech. Jacob lays bare the injustices he has suffered, but also powerfully testifies to God's vindication and protection. Laban, perhaps chastened by God's warning and by Jacob's passionate defense, and with no evidence of theft, shifts his tone. He cannot deny Jacob's prosperity or the truth of his service. He proposes a covenant, a treaty of peace between them. "Come now, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me." Genesis 31-44. So Jacob takes a stone and sets it up as a pillar. His kinsmen gather stones and make a heap. They eat a covenant meal there beside the heap of stones. Laban calls the heap Jegar Sahadutha, Aramaic, for heap of witness, while Jacob calls it Gilead, Hebrew, for heap of witness. Laban declares, "This heap is a witness between you and me today." He also names it Mitzpah Watchtower, saying, "The Lord watch between you and me, when we are out of one another's sight. If you oppress my daughters, or if you take wives besides my daughters, although no one is with us, see, God is witness between you and me." Genesis 31-49-50. The covenant essentially establishes a boundary and a non-aggression pact. Neither is to pass the heap of stones to harm the other. You reflect on the scene. The covenant at Gilead, Mitzpah, is a somewhat strained reconciliation, born more of necessity and mutual wariness than deep affection or forgiveness. Laban is still trying to exert some control, even in parting, with his conditions about Jacob's treatment of his daughters. Yet, it marks a formal end to their fraught relationship. Laban, having asserted his patriarchal concerns and secured this agreement, finally departs. Early in the morning Laban arose and kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned home. Genesis 31-55. There's a bittersweet quality to this farewell. 20 years of shared history, however difficult, are coming to a close. Jacob is now truly on his own, free from Laban's domination, leading his own substantial household towards the promised land. The peculiar sheep farm and its divinely blessed proceeds have enabled this independence. The ancient husbandry secrets, blessed by God, were the key to his release. As Laban's caravan recedes in one direction, Jacob turns his face resolutely towards Canaan. But the challenges are not over. The formidable figure of Esau, the brother he cheated and fled from 20 years prior, looms large in his thoughts. The journey ahead is still fraught with uncertainty. Yet, he has seen God's faithfulness prevail over Laban's cunning. God's protection shield him from Laban's wrath, and God's provision make him exceedingly prosperous. These experiences are stones in the foundation of his faith for what lies ahead. You ponder the unresolved elements. Rachel still has the stolen teraphim, a secret that will have later consequences for Jacob's household when he seeks to purify it. Before going to Bethel, Genesis 35, the reconciliation with Laban is more of a truce than a true healing of hearts. These details remind us that the path of faith is walked by imperfect people in a complex world. While interpretations may vary on minor details, the core message of God's unwavering love shines through, guiding, protecting, and providing for his people even amidst their flaws and failings. The sun sets over the hills of Gilead. Jacob's camp is quiet now, the tension of the confrontation with Laban having subsided. A profound chapter of his life has closed. He is no longer Jacob the servant, but Jacob the patriarch, wealthy and independent, leading his people towards their God-given inheritance. The legacy of the peculiar sheep farm in Haran is complete. It was a place of toil, of testing, of unexpected methods, and of astonishing divine blessing. It transformed Jacob's fortunes and became the springboard for his return. As you feel the cool night air settle, you might offer a silent prayer for all who are on long journeys, for those who have experienced difficult relationships, for those who are stepping out in faith towards a new calling. May they, like Jacob, experience God's guiding presence, his abundant provision, and his protecting hand. May they learn, as Jacob learned through the long years and the peculiar ways of God's working, to trust in the one who is always faithful to his promises. The story of Jacob's peculiar sheep farm drifts into the mists of memory, a testament to ancient secrets, yes, but more profoundly, a testament to an unchanging God who works in wondrous ways to bless and guide his people towards their promised rest. Let the peace of that assurance settle over you now as you drift gently into sleep, held in the knowledge of his unfailing care.